The Galactic Conference of Species was, as usual, a complete circus of evolutionary endpoints. Imagine, if you will, a room filled with beings who each thought they were the universe's gift to existence. Now add bureaucracy, political posturing, and enough translators to make a supercomputer cry. But today was different. Today the Ravagers were making their grand entrance. The massive doors of the Grand Chamber swung open with unnecessary dramatic flair, revealing three towering figures that made every other species' fight or flight response kick into overdrive. The Ravagers were exactly what you'd expect if you asked a nightmare to design the perfect predator. Standing at nearly 3 meters tall, their obsidian-scaled bodies rippled with muscle beneath armor that wasn't decorative but grown, because apparently regular scales weren't terrifying enough. Their 4 eyes glowed with bioluminescent malice, and each of their 4 arms ended in claws that could shred battleship armor. But the worst part? Those smiles. 3 rows of teeth that would make a chainsaw feel inadequate. Ambassador Zrixatal of the Centaurian Alliance actually fainted. Nobody blamed them. "We claim our seat at this gathering," announced the lead Ravager, his voice a rumble that made the chamber's crystal chandeliers tinkle nervously. "As is our right as the galaxy's apex species." The various ambassadors, representatives, and delegates shuffled uncomfortably in their seats. Nobody wanted to be the one to tell these walking death machines that technically they needed to file paperwork first. The bureaucratic union of Rigel would have an aneurysm if proper protocols weren't followed, but they seemed suddenly very interested in their datapads. The Ravagers took their self-assigned seats, which happened to be right in the center of the chamber. Several smaller species immediately requested seat reassignments to the furthest possible positions. "Now then," the lead Ravager continued, clearly enjoying the terror he was spreading, "we shall discuss the matter of our hunting territories. We require space." That's when the chamber's doors opened again. "Sorry we're late. Traffic was absolute murder in the Orion Arm. You would not believe how many solar storms we had to navigate around." The entire assembly turned to stare at the new arrivals. There were 3 of them, dressed in what appeared to be, and this caused several species to adjust their visual senses' casual business attire. Humans walking in like they were heading to a moderately important corporate meeting, rather than a gathering of the galaxy's most powerful species. The lead human, a man whose name tag simply read Bob, causing several universal translators to hiccup, was actually unwrapping some kind of food item as he walked in. "Is that a cheese sandwich?" his colleague asked, seeming far more interested in the food than the deadly predators currently taking up the room's center stage. "Yeah, want half? The replicators on our ship are still calibrating Earth recipes. This is the first decent one I've had in weeks." The Ravagers, for the first time in recorded history, looked confused. Their fearsome reputation typically preceded them by several star systems, yet these soft-skinned bipeds were discussing processed dairy products as if they weren't in the presence of the galaxy's most lethal species. "You dare interrupt," the lead Ravager began, rising to his full height. "Oh, hey, the Ravagers made it," Bob said cheerfully, taking another bite of his sandwich. "We were hoping to catch you guys. Listen, we've got this fantastic idea for a cultural exchange program. Tell me, how do you feel about barbecue?" The silence that followed was so profound that several species evolved the ability to hear it. The 3rd human, still standing by the door, pulled out what appeared to be a scheduling device. "We're thinking Thursday? Our embassy just got this amazing grill shipped in from Texas. You haven't lived until you've tried slow-smoked brisket." The Ravagers' 4 eyes blinked in unison, their fearsome appearance momentarily undermined by sheer bewilderment. These humans weren't following the script. They were supposed to cower, or at least show a minimal amount of survival instinct. Instead, Bob was brushing sandwich crumbs off his tie and asking if anyone knew where to find decent coffee in this sector of space. The rest of the galactic delegation watched this exchange with a mixture of horror and fascination, like witnessing a small puppy try to befriend a supernova. Several species began discreetly placing bets on how long the humans would survive. Little did they know this was just the beginning of a very interesting diplomatic relationship. The lead Ravager, who introduced himself as High Commander Vexatal, decided it was time to put these upstart humans in their place. Rising to his full height, he activated his species' natural bioluminescent threat display, causing patterns of deadly warning colors to ripple across his scales. "You address the apex predators of the galaxy with such casualness." His voice dropped to a menacing growl that had caused countless species to experience spontaneous bladder failure. Bob looked up from his phone, where he appeared to be playing some sort of game involving colorful candy. "Oh, sorry about that. Where are my manners? Would you like the other half of this sandwich? It's provolone." The other delegates gasped. Offering food to a Ravager was either a deadly insult or a sign of suicidal tendencies. Possibly both. Vexithal's massive claws extended with a sound like unsheathing swords. "Perhaps you don't understand your position, tiny prey species. We have hunted beings twice your size for sport." "Only twice?" asked Bob's colleague, genuinely curious. "That's neat. Hey Bob, remember that time your grandmother went moose hunting? How big was that one again?" "Oh man, Grandma Betty's legendary moose. That thing was huge. She tracked it for 3 days in the Alaskan wilderness, had to drag it out herself too, wouldn't let anyone help, said it would spoil the experience." Bob chuckled, completely ignoring the increasingly agitated Ravager looming over him. Vexithal slammed all 4 hands onto the conference table, leaving deep claw marks in the supposedly indestructible material. Several smaller species dove under their seats. "You mock us," he snarled, his breath hot enough to fog the human's glasses. The third human finally looked up from their scheduler. "Mock you? No way, we're genuinely impressed. Hey, speaking of hunting, we should show you our historical documents about the time humans hunted mammoths to extinction. You know, for fun. We've got some great cave paintings." This caused the Ravagers to pause. Their universal translators must be malfunctioning. Did these soft-clothed creatures just casually mention hunting massive beasts to extinction for entertainment? "Bob," called out the scheduler-wielding human, "didn't you do that presentation at the Xenobiological Conference about human persistence hunting, the one with the clips from nature documentaries?" "Oh yeah, actually I've got it right here on my tablet. Want to see? It's pretty cool how we used to just chase things until they died of exhaustion. Really efficient if you've got the time." The Ravagers' threat displays flickered uncertainly. Their entire diplomatic strategy was based on intimidation, yet these humans were treating them like mild curiosities at best. Vexithal tried one more time. "We have decimated entire species." "Only entire species?" Bob raised an eyebrow while finishing his sandwich. "That's cute. We accidentally decimated species we weren't even trying to hunt. Did you know we nearly wiped out whales just to light some lamps? Dark times, really. We feel pretty bad about that now, very big on conservation these days." The other delegates watched in fascinated horror as the mighty Ravagers experienced something entirely new: confusion. "Your soft flesh would tear easily in our claws," hissed one of Vexithal's subordinates. "Probably," agreed Bob cheerfully. "We're pretty squishy. That's why we invented these neat things called guns. And then we felt those weren't efficient enough, so we made bigger guns. And then nuclear weapons, and then we felt really bad about those too. We're working on it. We've got some impulse control issues as a species." "Which reminds me," added the human with the scheduler, "we really should finalize this dinner plan. We're thinking of serving something called ghost peppers as an appetizer. You know, start things off with a bang." The Ravagers huddled together, speaking in rapid, hushed tones. These humans were clearly insane. They spoke of extinction-level hunting with nostalgia, treated apex predators like dinner party guests, and seemed to have no concept of proper terror. When they turned back, Vexithal's voice had lost some of its menacing edge. "We will consider your invitation." "Great," Bob beamed, pulling out his own scheduler. "And don't worry about dietary restrictions. We humans can cook pretty much anything. Comes from being adaptable omnivores. Though between you and me, I think the vegans might be onto something." Back on their flagship, the Ravagers held what had to be the most unusual war council in their species' history. The massive chamber, decorated with the bones of their most impressive kills, seemed somehow less intimidating after their encounter with the humans. "It must be a trap," declared Subcommander Zaxakar, pacing on all sixes, having dropped to his auxiliary limbs in agitation. "No species invites predators to dinner unless they plan to poison them." Vexital sat on his throne of compressed battlefield armor, scrolling through the official dinner invitation on his datapad. The humans had sent it with something called emoji decorations. "The research team has analyzed their chemical composition," reported Science Officer Nixital. "Humans are indeed omnivores, but their digestive system is remarkable. They can process substances that would kill most species. They deliberately consume fermented items for pleasure." For pleasure, several Ravagers hissed in disbelief. There's more, Nixital continued, her scales shifting nervously. They regularly ingest capsaicin for entertainment. They introduce toxic bacterial cultures into their food to enhance flavor. They drink liquid stimulants that would stop most hearts, and they call it breakfast. Meanwhile, across the galaxy's diplomatic sector, an unprecedented betting pool was forming. The Galactic Exchange's odds makers were working overtime. 2,000 credits on the humans serving something that burns the Ravagers' mouths, shouted a Centaurian delegate. 3,000 on the Ravagers fleeing before the main course, countered an Andromedan. The Rigelian Bureaucratic Union, normally strict about gambling regulations, was too busy placing their own bets to enforce any rules. Back at the human embassy, preparations were in full swing. Bob stood in the massive kitchen, reviewing plans with his team. "Okay, folks, we've got to nail this," he announced, looking over the prep stations. "First impressions are everything. The anthropologists say the Ravagers value displays of hunting prowess, so we're going full Texas barbecue competition on this one." "Sir," called out one of the chefs, "the ghost pepper sauce is ready for testing. We've had to add warning labels in 3 languages. "Perfect, and the brisket. Been smoking for 12 hours already. We're using that old family recipe you provided." Bob nodded approvingly. "Remember, we're not just cooking dinner. We're demonstrating humanity's mastery over fire, meat, and technically dangerous substances. Let's show these apex predators how we do things on Earth." The Ravager High Council continued their debate. "They sent us their menu," Zaxkar announced. "I don't understand half these words. What's a chipotle?" "According to their data, it's a smoke-dried jalapeno," Nixital explained. "Humans intentionally set their food on fire before eating it, sometimes twice." Vexathol leaned forward on his throne. "And this barbecue process? They take meat, apply heat and smoke for extended periods, and add various compounds to enhance flavor. The process can take Earth days. They've turned slow death into a culinary art form." The council chamber fell silent as this information sank in. "They're either the most brilliant trap makers in the galaxy," Vexathol mused, "or they're exactly as insane as they appear to be." A junior officer burst into the chamber, looking distressed. "High Commander, we've intercepted communications. The humans are discussing something called competitive eating contests. They turn consumption into a sport." In the embassy kitchen, Bob's phone chimed with a message. "Good news, everyone. The Ravagers have officially accepted. They're bringing something called ceremonial hunting trophies to display." "Should we be concerned?" asked his assistant. "Nah, we'll just put up some of our family hunting photos. My uncle's marlin collection should do nicely. Oh, and Grandma Betty's moose head." The betting pools across the galaxy reached fever pitch. The Arcturus Insurance Corporation was refusing to cover any aspect of the event, citing justified concerns about mixing apex predators with clearly unhinged primates. The Galactic Council's Xenopsychology Department had to bring in extra staff just to handle the influx of research requests. Nobody had ever seen Ravagers uncertain before. It was revolutionizing their entire field of study. "Has anyone informed the humans that the Ravagers once ate an entire diplomatic team?" asked a concerned council member. "Yes," replied another. "They said something about raising the stakes and then laughed for several minutes. We believe it was some form of wordplay, but our linguists are still analyzing it." As the day of the dinner approached, final preparations were made on both sides. The Ravagers polished their ceremonial armor and sharpened their display claws. The humans marinated meat, stoked fires, and argued about whether to serve craft beer or wine with the main course. A Rigelian observer noted in their official report, "The humans appear to be treating this potentially apocalyptic diplomatic event with the same level of concern as a neighborhood cookout. Either they have achieved a level of technological superiority we cannot detect, or they are operating on a plane of existence where common sense simply does not apply." The betting odds shifted hourly. The only consensus was that something unprecedented was about to happen, and nobody wanted to miss it. The human embassy had been transformed into what Bob proudly called a proper Texas-style backyard. The main diplomatic hall now featured long wooden tables made from actual earth oak, checkered tablecloths, because, according to Bob, it wasn't a real barbecue without them, and the subtle scent of hickory smoke wafting through the air filtration system. Mounted on the walls were various earth-hunting trophies, including Grandma Betty's legendary moose head, which seemed to stare disapprovingly at everyone who entered. The Ravagers' own trophies would have pride of place on the opposite wall, creating what Bob called a nice, balanced atmosphere of mutual appreciation for killing things. The outdoor section of the embassy had been configured to match Earth's atmospheric conditions, complete with artificial gravity set to Earth normal. The centerpiece was a massive smoker that Bob had specially imported from Texas, its size suggesting it could probably cook an entire elephant. Knowing humans, it probably had. Temperature holding steady at 225 degrees Fahrenheit, reported the head chef. Brisket's looking perfect, ribs are almost done, and the ghost pepper sauce has already melted 3 sampling spoons. The Ravagers arrived precisely on schedule, their massive transport ship casting a shadow over the embassy's landing pad. They emerged in full ceremonial armor, carrying display cases containing what appeared to be the skulls of various extinct species. "Welcome," Bob greeted them at the door, wearing an apron that read, "Kiss the cook at your own risk." "Love the armor. Really brings out the bioluminescence in your scales." Vexithal's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. The human wasn't even armed, unless... Was that large metal fork some kind of weapon? "We have brought trophies of our greatest hunts," announced Zaxakar, clearly expecting the humans to be intimidated. "Awesome, we've got wall space right next to my uncle's marlin collection. You know, the funny thing about marlin fishing, sometimes they jump right into the boat and stab people. Makes the hunt more exciting, right?" The Ravagers exchanged glances. These humans spoke about being impaled by prey as if discussing the weather. As they moved to the dining area, various earth food aromas hit the Ravagers' sensitive olfactory organs. Their universal translators struggled to process Bob's enthusiastic explanations. "So this first course is just a little something to wake up the taste buds. We call them atomic wings. Don't worry, no actual atomic material involved, just ghost peppers and Carolina Reapers." "These plants," Nixital asked cautiously, "they are deadly." "Oh no, they just cause intense pain and sometimes hallucinations. We breed them specially to be extra potent, for fun." The Ravagers watched in horror as Bob casually popped one of these pain-inducing morsels into his mouth. "Perfect heat level," he declared, while his face turned slightly red. The first course was served. The Ravagers, driven by pride and an unwillingness to show weakness, followed their host's example. Several seconds later, Vexithal's bioluminescent displays went into overdrive. "Water makes it worse," Bob advised cheerfully, passing them glasses of something called milk. "Trust me on this one." As the evening progressed, the humans revealed more shocking aspects of their dietary habits. They explained how they discovered cheese. "We found out you could take milk, let it go bad in exactly the right way, and eat it." Their love of coffee, bean juice that makes you faster, yes please. And the concept of competitive eating. The record for hot dogs is 76 in 10 minutes. "But the real pride and joy," Bob announced as the main course arrived, "is this brisket, smoked for 16 hours at low temperature. We basically took one of the toughest parts of the cow and showed it who's boss through sheer patience." The Ravagers, still recovering from the atomic wings, watched as slices of perfectly smoked meat were placed before them. The humans had turned slow cooking into psychological warfare against food. "You torture your food before eating it?" asked Zaxakar, both horrified and impressed. "Torture? Nah, we prefer to call it tenderizing with extreme prejudice. Wait till you hear about what we do to lobsters." As the Ravagers cautiously sampled the brisket, their expressions shifted from suspicion to surprise to something approaching respect. The meat was perfectly cooked, seasoned with a complex blend of spices that their sensors couldn't fully analyze. "This is how we usually prefer our meat," Bob explained, slicing into his portion. "Though some humans like it rare, you know, still pink in the middle. And there's this one dish called steak tartare, where we just don't cook it at all. Raw meat, raw egg, bit of seasoning, delicious." "Raw?" Several Ravagers dropped their utensils. "Oh yeah, we can eat lots of things raw, fish, meat, eggs, as long as it's fresh. Well, except for some fish, sometimes we let that ferment first. There's this thing called surströmming." Vexithal held up a hand. "You intentionally ferment fish before consumption?" "Sure, along with vegetables, dairy, beans, pretty much anything, really. If it exists, someone somewhere has probably fermented it and turned it into a delicacy." Bob took a sip of his beer, another fermented beverage, as he'd cheerfully explained earlier. The Ravagers were beginning to understand why the humans had seemed so unafraid during their first meeting. Any species that deliberately cultivated pain-inducing plants for snacking, aged their food until it chemically transformed, and showed such dedication to the art of slow-cooking meat wasn't to be trifled with. "You know what would go great with this brisket?" Bob asked, reaching for a bottle. "Hot sauce. I brought my own blend. It's got 7 different types of peppers and a hint of garlic. Had to sign a waiver to get it through customs." As the dinner progressed into what Bob called the digestive contemplation phase, he pulled out a datapad to show their guests some Earth history. The Ravagers, now significantly more relaxed thanks to several bottles of aged whiskey, which they'd initially suspected was some form of weapons-grade fuel, leaned in with interest. "So here's the thing about humans," Bob began, pulling up some images. "We didn't start at the top of the food chain. We had to work our way up through sheer stubbornness and creativity." "You mean your weapons?" asked Zaxakar, who was starting to develop a taste for bourbon. "Nah, well before that. See this?" Bob showed them a recreation of early humans pursuing a mammoth. "We used to hunt things way bigger than us through persistence hunting. Just followed them until they got tired. Imagine being that mammoth. Every time you think you've lost the weird naked apes, they show up again, just casually jogging along." "You tracked prey by exhausting them?" Vexathal seemed both disturbed and fascinated. "Yep, we're basically the horror movie monster of the animal kingdom. Slow but unstoppable. Can't outrun us in the long term. We'll just keep coming." The Ravagers watched footage of various human hunting methods throughout history. The spear throwers, the pit traps, the coordinated group hunts. Their respect grew with each example. "But here's where it gets really interesting," Bob continued, switching to images of Earth's predators. "These are some of our planet's apex predators. Great white sharks, tigers, lions, Kodiak bears, and we figured out how to hunt them all. Not because we had to, mind you, sometimes just to prove we could." The Ravagers studied the images with professional interest. "These creatures, they are formidable," Nixital admitted. "Oh yeah, a tiger can kill you in seconds. Bears can run at ridiculous speeds and crush your skull with one paw. But you know what we did? We looked at them and thought, hey, bet we could turn their babies into pets, and we did. Well, with wolves at least, now we have chihuahuas." Bob showed them pictures of dogs, explaining how humans selectively bred one of Earth's most successful predators into countless varieties, including some that could fit in purses. "You modified apex predators into companions." Zaxakar's translator struggled with the concept. "Modified might be a strong word. We just gave them treats and belly rubs for a few thousand generations. Now they help us hunt other things. Circle of life, you know." The Ravagers were beginning to understand why their initial intimidation tactics had failed so spectacularly. They were dealing with a species that had stared down Earth's most dangerous predators and thought, "Cute, let's feed it snacks." "But the real kicker," Bob continued, pulling up more images, "is that we're not even obligate carnivores. We can eat almost anything. Plants, meat, fungi. There's probably someone somewhere trying to figure out how to make rocks edible right now. We've got colonies of bacteria living in our guts that help us digest things that would kill most species." Vexathal, who had moved on to trying something called tequila, nodded thoughtfully. "This explains much about your species' approach to diplomacy. Right? When you can eat everything, suddenly the galaxy becomes a lot less intimidating and a lot more delicious." The power dynamic in the room had shifted subtly but significantly. The Ravagers were no longer seeing humans as potential prey, or even as equals, but as something entirely new. A species crazy enough to chase animals until they died of exhaustion, tough enough to digest almost anything, and innovative enough to turn predators into pets. "You know," Vexathal said, examining his glass of whiskey, "perhaps we should discuss that cultural exchange program you mentioned." "Great idea," Bob beamed. "We could start with a cooking class. Ever heard of something called fugu? It's this fish that's super poisonous unless you prepare it just right. We turned it into a delicacy." The Ravagers' universal translators gave up entirely at this point, but they got the general idea. They were dealing with a species that not only survived, but thrived by turning everything, even things that could kill them, into either food, pets, or sporting opportunities. To adaptability, Vexathal raised his glass in what he'd learned was a human tradition. "And to new friends," Bob responded. "Now, who's ready to hear about this thing we invented called a chili cook-off?" The next Galactic Council meeting was a spectacle that would be recorded in history books across multiple star systems. The Ravagers arrived not in their traditional battle armor, but wearing what appeared to be matching Hawaiian shirts, a gift from their new human allies. The betting pools across the galaxy collectively crashed when Vexethal and Bob walked in sharing something called beef jerky, while discussing the finer points of slow smoking techniques. You should see what they do with something called a smoker box, Vexethal was explaining to a thoroughly confused Centaurian delegate. The patience required to maintain optimal temperature for 20 Earth hours, truly a hunt of endurance. The Rogelian Bureaucratic Union had to create an entirely new classification system just to categorize the alliance documents between humans and Ravagers. Nobody had ever seen a peace treaty that included recipe exchanges as mandatory articles. Let me get this straight, the council head spoke carefully. You're proposing joint hunting expeditions? With a culinary focus, Bob clarified. The Ravagers have some amazing techniques for tracking prey across asteroid fields, and we've got some fantastic marinades that would work great with space game. The alliance turned out to be more than just a culinary exchange. The Ravagers brought their extensive knowledge of tracking and hunting, while humans shared their expertise in turning literally anything into either food or entertainment, preferably both. News spread across the galaxy about the first joint human-Ravager barbecue competition. The event had to be held in a specially reinforced station after someone mentioned the concept of deep frying to the Ravagers. The resulting fusion cuisine created several new entries in the galactic database of technically not weapons. The xenopsychology department had to revise their entire understanding of predator species psychology. The sight of Ravager warriors enthusiastically participating in something called a chili cook-off challenged every existing theory they had. They've started a restaurant chain, reported one thoroughly confused analyst. The humans are teaching them about franchising opportunities and something called secret sauce. The other species watched in amazement as the most feared predators in the galaxy began taking cooking classes. Hunting grounds were being converted into culinary academies. Battle cruisers were being retrofitted with industrial kitchens. The humans have introduced them to competitive eating contests, whispered a horrified Andromedan observer. They're combining their natural competitive instincts with human dietary capabilities. Do you have any idea what this means? The implications were indeed far-reaching. Other predator species began approaching humans for cultural exchanges, leading to an unprecedented era of gastronomic diplomacy. The galaxy watched in equal parts horror and fascination as humans taught apex predators about the concept of food blogs. In the human embassy, Bob was reviewing plans for the first intergalactic food festival, while Vexethal examined something called a pizza menu with intense concentration. You put pineapple on a flatbread with meat and cheese? The Ravager commander sounded intrigued rather than horrified, which said everything about how much things had changed. That's actually our most controversial food item, Bob explained. Started more fights than our entire military history. The final proof of the Alliance's success came when Ravager ships began broadcasting cooking shows instead of threat displays. Their traditional war chants were gradually replaced with heated debates about proper grilling temperatures. As Bob watched Vexethal carefully flipping burgers on the embassy's grill, the Ravager commander had insisted on learning proper technique. He couldn't help but smile. Who would have thought that humanity's greatest diplomatic achievement would come not from their strength or technology, but from their weird relationship with food? You know, Vexethal mused, perfectly timing the flip of a patty, perhaps we weren't the apex predators after all, you humans. You didn't just hunt. You turned hunting into an art form, then into a social activity, then into entertainment. That's humanity for you, Bob replied, preparing to explain the concept of tailgating parties. We've never met something we couldn't either eat, befriend, or turn into a competitive sport. The galaxy would never be the same, but maybe that was for the best. After all, it's hard to start a war when you're too busy arguing about barbecue techniques.